We've heard calls from defectors from the Syrian army for international action through the UN Security Council, even a no-fly zone like the one that was set up over Libya. What does your organisation advocate for?
Well, we advocate for two things. The first thing is something called buffer zone with the borders with Turkey. We reported that a massacre happened the day before yesterday in northwest of part of the country in the province of Idlib. 111 persons, civilians, have been killed with a few defectors from the army. It was a collective punishment because this village was providing food for the defectors. Regardless, we agree with the principle of defecting or staying with the army, but these are civilians. And we have videos and we have full names of those civilians who have been killed with their hands tied to their backs. So we call for buffer zones so it can act as a safe haven for those suffering people if they can escape to if they don't have any other resort. And the other thing we are campaigning for is humanitarian corridors which would act as a safe passage to provide medical supply and food for the entrapped people in central cities in Homs and Hama, because the people there are dying because they don't have medical supplies, they don't have enough food, and they don't have gas or diesel, and it's now freezing. It's -0. So that's what we're campaigning for, and we think that dialogue and convincing the regime to admit that there is a crisis and we should accept compromises and not trying to say that we are fighting against armed gangs. This is not true. There is a crisis, and the crisis should be solved by dialogue and by implementing democracy, not by denying that there is a crisis and saying that freedom and dignity is equal to having armed gangs fighting against the regime.
That was Mousab Azzawi from the UK-based pressure group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The latest UN estimate is that violence in Syria has claimed 5,000 lives, but one British-based group has released evidence this week of a significantly higher figure. The rights group Avaaz counts the deaths of some 6,237 civilians and security forces from the conflict. This number includes at least 400 children and the deaths of 617 people under torture. The group calls on world powers to toughen their stance against Damascus and blames Russia for blocking action. Syria is a long-standing ally and arms buyer from Russia. Moscow warns against Western efforts to censure Assad through the UN Security Council. Foreign involvement will only exacerbate the situation, Russian officials say, warning against a Libya-style engagement there. Russia vetoed a European-backed draft Security Council resolution, but has since proposed its own document. To look at this, I'm joined on the phone from Beirut by Wissam Tarif, a campaigner for Avaaz. Wissam, what can we conclude from your new study on the Syrian death toll?
Well, it shows that 1 in every 300 Syrians have been affected by this suppression. The regime has been able to process in the suppression machine so far 69,000 people. They released from them 32,000. Most of them have been tortured. And they have killed until now 6,237 people, including 5,361 men, 473 women, and 403 children. The Syrian structure, this regime, has worked a long time and kept this totalitarian regime working the element of fear. And when people lost fear, they took the street, they tried to raise that and make people panic. So they started to shoot in protesters on the streets, and also they started to detain people, torture, and release in a very systematic way. So all in all, the numbers that we have found is just like the level of oppression there is astonishing to be witnessing this in the 21st century.
And we're hearing reports about double suicide car bomb attacks on Syrian security service buildings. The government says that these were the responsibility of Al-Qaeda, but opposition activists say that they could have been staged to influence the Arab League observers there. What do you make of it?
Obviously, the regime is trying to say, well, this is not an uprising, this is a bunch of terrorists taking over the country, etc. The Syrian regime has a long history of manipulating facts, of assassination, including ambassadors during the Lebanese civil war in Lebanon. the Syrian regime has a long history of manipulating, so we can't believe anything that the regime says. My personal feeling that the regime at this stage feel that they are stuck and they are desperate to get away from their commitment on signing the primary protocol to allow the Arab monitors inside the country.
Army defectors from the Syrian army have called for international action through the UN Security Council and even a no-fly zone over Syria like the one that was imposed on Libya. Do you see either of these as possible outcomes?
Well, the Syrian people have uprised for 7 months peacefully. We haven't seen any kind of resistance, military resistance from the street. That has changed now. We see that people are picking up weapons. There are defected soldiers. We're talking about more than 10,000 soldiers who have defected from the loyal army. They are fighting back. So definitely this is taking there is now a militarized wing of the revolution. Basically, to give those people a chance, then they need by certain means a buffer zone. One, to provide a kind of haven for the defectors to be able to operate from. And most importantly, it's for the civilians to flee to. Like part of our humanitarian program, we have been able to send basically smuggling into the country more than $1 million of medical supplies. Now this operation is being more and more difficult, and the level of injuries is beyond our capacity and other NGOs working on this. It's just beyond our capacity. A lot of people are dying. So there is a humanitarian crisis growing in Syria. So there are two elements here. One is the defected soldiers, and we have to keep in mind that the Arab League has called on the Syrian army to disobey its political leadership. And two is the huge humanitarian crisis that is in Idlib and in Homs. People need a safe haven to flee for. And how do you impose that? It is by a buffer zone, and the buffer zone has to come by an international resolution, which Russia has been blocking so far, has been sending weapons, selling weapons to the regime, opposing any sanctions, and including an arm embargo.
Just picking up on that point, you're echoing the comments from your executive director, Reinl Patel. He said, I quote, Russia has gone too far, delaying international action and arming Assad's death squads. What message are you sending to Moscow?
Moscow has to look at the region from a strategic point of view. Al-Assad has been there alive for a long time. This man has proven to be a killer. He has been slaughtering his own people. The number of casualties, which we know about, exceeds 6,200 people until the 9th of December. Russia so far has been supportive of Al-Assad in many levels. At the Security Council, they have been selling weapons to the regime, and this man has been their main guy in any peace process or any future peace process in the future. This has changed now. The Syrian people are uprising. The Syrian people want their freedom, and the Arab world is standing with them and is supporting them. Therefore, Russia has to stop blocking international mandate on Syria and look at the wider picture and look at its interests in the whole region, not only in Syria.
That was Wissam Tarif, a campaigner for the online pressure group Avaaz, ending that report on Syria.